In this video, we're going to be talking about a sensitive topic, Canadian experience, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, so let's get right into it. What we're going to be talking about in this video is what job seekers mean by Canadian experience, and then we're going to move on to what employers mean by Canadian experience, and finally, of course, we're going to talk about how you can go about preparing for this challenge in your job search. Now, you've read a lot online, I'm sure, about how people have had to face this dilemma of Canadian experience. You've heard stories about doctors driving taxis, people working survival jobs to make ends meet. There are a whole list of reasons as to why this happens, and Canadian experience is one of those reasons that tends to stick out. And it bothers you because that's something that you don't really have control over. And for people who are already in Canada, who are experiencing this problem firsthand, they're frustrated that they're told you don't have Canadian experience at the job interview. And they ask themselves, well, how am I supposed to get Canadian experience if you don't give me a chance at the job? The Ontario Human Rights Commission actually did a survey on this, and they surveyed both job seekers as well as employers on this issue. And to confirm that this is a real issue in Canada, the amount of responses that they've got actually confirms that this is an ongoing concern that newcomers have to Canada. So they went ahead and did the survey, and what you're going to see is little snippets that I'd taken from that survey, and you're looking at what people had to say about this problem. Someone in a regulated field, in agriculture environment, says that he doesn't have Canadian experience. People have told this person that you've not worked in Canada even though your skills are transferable. They also get told that they're overqualified, and employers tell them that they need to understand a lot more about Canadian society and culture. There's a link below the video that you can refer to actually see more details on how the Ontario Human Rights Commission actually conducted this survey, and you can see a whole lot more responses from other job seekers. Before we move on, I wanted to run something by you. A lot of people are told they don't have Canadian experience at the job interview, and Canadian experience means working in Canada. Well, the response I have to that is, if Canadian experience means working in Canada, your resume already shows that you have never worked in Canada. Why did you get called for the job interview in the first place? That's an interesting point to note, and for us to further understand what is the true meaning behind Canadian experience. So let's look into that a little more. At the surface, the common definition of Canadian experience that you'll hear of is Canadian experience means working in Canada. Personally, we don't believe that's true. Our personal definition of Canadian experience is the hiring manager's perception of your soft skills and knowledge of workplace culture. And to take it further for people who are in a regulated field, it also means you have the Canadian credentials to practice your job. So let's look into that a lot more now. Back to the survey done by Ontario Human Rights Commission. What employers said about the Canadian experience and when they use it at interviews is it's about the risk that many newcomers face when they do not adapt well to workplace culture. Although newcomers may have the technical skills to do the job, lack of workplace culture could lead to miscommunication, which is also seen as a risk. You have a human resource manager here who's making a reference to a regulated job, talking about familiarity with Canadian law. And finally, references are also important out here in Canada. I still get reference calls today from my older employees. And when a hiring manager or recruiter wants to contact a reference, they trust a Canadian reference a whole lot more. So now that you have some idea of what employers mean by Canadian experience, you must be asking yourself, well, I've got 20 years of experience doing what I do, so why do I still need Canadian experience? Think about it this way. Canadian experience is a lot like car insurance for newcomers. As we all know, insurance premiums are tied to statistical risk factors. So did you know that car insurance is a lot more expensive for newcomers in the first 3 years? And the reason is because your years of experience driving in your home country means that you are at a higher risk of causing an accident over here. Now, I'm sure that when you come to Canada, you have no problems going back to driving school and understanding how driving is done in Canada over here. Even though technically you can still get behind the wheel of a car and know how to drive, but you accept the fact that you still need to learn these little differences about how driving is done in Canada, especially if you drive on the other side of the road in your home country. So the will that you have to learn and go back to understanding how driving is done and get your Canadian driving license, that same will and understanding is what you need to supplement the years of experience that you already have in your job. And that's the attitude that will get you past this Canadian barrier. So let's talk about the specific areas that recruiters and hiring managers focus on when the lack of Canadian experience becomes an issue. First and foremost, when you get that first call from the recruiter, they're assessing you for your verbal communication skills. And command of English or French is of utmost importance over here. Your accent could also be a factor, so bear that in mind as well. And how you engage in small talk is also important. Culturally in Canada, in a professional environment, we don't talk about politics or religion or personal family information and matters. So bringing these up during a conversation could show that you have a lack of Canadian workplace culture. Body language is also important. The way you shake your hand, the way you maintain eye contact during a conversation is also important. And your sitting position is also important to show that you're confident. Make sure you're sitting upright with your hands in front of you so that it shows confidence and trust. And the confidence that you show during a verbal conversation, either when it's at the phone interview or a live interview, is also important. Make sure you highlight your accomplishments with confidence and what you've done for your organization, and you're asking the right questions during a job interview. In the job interview itself, one concept that you should be aware of is behavioral interview questions. And what a behavioral interview question is when the interview is asking you to recall a moment in history when you did something. And some of these questions could be when you worked on a big project, when you exercised leadership, how you worked as a team. The trickier questions is about a time when you disagreed with your boss, or the time when you made a mistake. These are some of the typical behavioral interview questions that exist. Now, one of the ways we've seen people struggle with behavioral interview questions, and they don't even know about it, is that they downplay their accomplishments. And you need to stop doing this if you want to appear more confident at the job interview. And one of the ways this happens is that people use we more than I in their explanations. You need to stop doing that. Hiring managers want to know how you performed a task, how you performed in the team, and how you personally contributed to that story that you're narrating. After all, they're hiring you, not your team. So if you're narrating a story about a time when you were part of a big project, the more you use we, the less the hiring manager is going to really grasp about what you accomplished. So start talking about how you performed your tasks in that job. And this is one of the ways you can get the hiring manager more confident about what it is that you bring to the table. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, if I keep saying I, it's going to sound like I'm bragging and they won't like that. Well, there's a difference between bragging and confidence. Bragging is when you say something like, I'm the best person in sales. Confidence is when you can supplement a claim with facts, in which case, I made $1.5 million in revenue in my first 6 months. This is the difference between bragging and confidence. And what the hiring manager is expecting to see at the interview is confidence. What you're doing here is stating the facts about how you performed in sales. And if the hiring manager perceives that for you to be the best, that's great. This goes back to preparation and how you're able to really dig into your past to focus on what you contributed to every project and task that you've done. People who are going into regulated fields need to understand that another barrier in terms of Canadian experience is getting local Canadian credentials to practice in that field. Some of the top regulated fields are the medical field or engineering fields and even the teaching fields. You need to really conduct your research on these areas and find out how you need to get those qualifications to practice these fields in Canada. Canada takes the regulation and governance of these fields very seriously because, as you can imagine, there is a health and safety to the social community in each of these fields. This is why there's very strict compliance into how these fields are practiced. So you really need to do the research in terms of what it is you need to do to get accredited into these fields, and more importantly, how long it takes. A lot of licensing bodies, associations, and universities help people bridge the gap when they're practicing in a regulated field. So you do need to do the research on that. And from the previous video, you could also connect with a mentor, ideally, to understand more details of how you need to go about doing it. Another important information you should get from your mentor is understanding what jobs you can do while you're waiting for your licensing to come through. So what can you do to show a hiring executive that you've got Canadian experience on your resume? For one, volunteering is a big culture out here in Canada, and a lot of hiring managers appreciate it. You can contact the associations in your industry to find out what volunteering opportunities you can take part in. What volunteering will also do is help you get those local references that they're asking for. Volunteering is a big culture out here in North America as a whole. And a survey conducted by Deloitte shows that as much as 82% of hiring managers respect volunteering experience on your resume. So it's something definitely worth considering. You can also seek to get local education in Canada if you choose to do so. And what that does is it allows you to get local credentials which hiring managers would respect, and it would also give you access to the professors or anyone who's part of the learning staff in that college or university or learning institute that you're a part of. They obviously have a large network of the industry that you're learning from in there, and you can use that network to find mentors or more information about how your industry is practiced in Canada. So it's time to take action right now. What you can start by doing is Googling about Canadian work culture and study the topics that you're seeing on the various blogs that come up. Once you do that, you can then Google behavioral interview questions and find all the common questions that are asked around this topic and relate the two. Go back into your experience and try to figure out the best answers considering Canadian work culture. Take a challenge. Think about the biggest project that you've done that you're proud of, and then take out your mobile phone and hit record and record yourself talking about what you accomplished in that project, in the same way a hiring manager would expect you to narrate it during an interview. And then play it back to yourself and listen to the number of times you said we in that narration instead of I. And then try and refine it so that you can do it with a lot more I instead of we. It's okay to use we sometimes, especially at the start, because obviously you may have initiated a project as it from a team perspective, but for majority of that answer, you should be talking about what you did. Use the earlier video on networking to use that process to find a mentor in your industry and field. A mentor will be able to explain to you about Canadian workplace culture, the typical kinds of questions that get asked in interviews, and if in your regulated field, how you can practice your job while getting licensing. And finally, research on how you can become a volunteer in Canada and look at local education as well, because we just talked about how those are two important factors that will help you get Canadian experience on your resume. So that's it for these 3 videos, and we trust that you got a lot of value out of it. Stay tuned for more content from Zero to Hired coming to your inbox. Until the next time, bye for now.